You're listening to Curiosity Invited with David Bryan here on LA Talk Radio.
Hello, my name is David Bryan, and this is Curiosity Invited. Tune in for an open-minded conversation about interesting and important things. Hello, and welcome to Curiosity Invited. My name is David Bryan, and I'm recording an abbreviated introduction, really because I'm limited by a 55-minute cutoff by some of the places this is posted, and I don't want to cut out almost anything from my conversation with Carol Bell, who is a therapist and the mother of former country western singers Luke Bell. And in response to that, in response to Luke's death, Carol created the Luke Bell Memorial Affordable Counseling Program, and it's worth talking about. And I hope you will tune in and listen. I so enjoyed my conversation with Carol. I hope you do as well. So, all right, here we go. Hello, everybody. It's David Bryan, and as promised, Curiosity Invited, and as promised, I am speaking with Carol Bell, a name that, well, if you're local, you might know her name. Local, everybody's local, but local to Wyoming, northwestern Wyoming. And Carol Bell, as I said, is a therapist, but she was not always a therapist. She was a business owner. She was a teacher. She originally studied English and American literature, et cetera, et cetera. So, Carol, thank you for being here, and we're going to talk about a bunch of different things, I think, and I really appreciate you giving your time. So, thanks.
I'm happy to be here.
Good. You rushed from a therapy appointment to here. So, which meant what? You sort of turned around in your chair.
Yeah, exactly.
I love the short commute of working at home.
Yeah, it's great.
So, yeah. Well, so let's start with, was there anything to say about the fact that you were born in Shell and grew up on a ranch? And I think the rest of the world very romantic about that, right? It's like, oh, you grew up on a ranch, and should they be?
Should they be? Wow, that's a hard question. I guess that I will say, as a child, it was romantic. I mean, I was also taught to be very tied into the romantic notion of ranching. And we were taught to be very proud. If we whined when we were moving cattle, which we did from a very early age, and often our days started, we would get up at like 3:30 in the morning to be out in the desert before it got hot so we could get the cattle moving, and we wouldn't get home until 7 or so at night. And if we were 8 or 10 years old, that's a pretty long day.
You bet.
And sometimes with very little food and water. And if we whined, my parents would say, most kids would give their eye teeth to be out here.
They're right.
So we were taught to buy into the romantic notion, but as I've gotten older, I guess I realize that the life I was taught to believe I was leading was not the life I was leading.
Oh, that's interesting. That's mysterious. What does that mean?
It's just a very patriarchal culture still, and
it's a men's world.
It's a man's world, and it's sort of based on this idea that of the strong, independent type, it will persevere. And actually, ranchers depend heavily on one another, on their neighbors and community members, and also they do depend on public grazing space, and
Yeah.
because they, and I, you know, it's important, they are raising our food, but they also do get a lot of government support when there are forest fires, or, you know, so I feel like, yeah, it's definitely kind of you only see the romantic part.
Yeah. It's so interesting that, I mean, because on the one hand, geez, this was not what I was going to talk about, but here we go. See, I think so many people, I think there is something really special about growing up in, well, first of all, raising food, whatever it counts. I mean, it's, you know, if it used to be that everybody was a farmer, right? Everybody was a farmer or a rancher, right? And now, what is it, 1%, less than 1% of the population, and they make the food for everybody else. They make life possible. That's incredible and important. And there is a certain thing that growing up in the city, you don't, you know, most people don't even get their fingernails dirty.
So I guess I will say that that is one of the beautiful things about my childhood is I
Yeah.
think it, um, when I think about my own resilience, my own mental health, I think it is really such a gift to be raised with so much meaning and purpose.
Hmm.
You know, we did feel like the work that we were doing was really important. It mattered. It mattered because we were raising food, but it also, if we didn't show up for work, sometimes things died. So it
Right.
did feel like the work that we did, even as children, doing chores, was important. And also, the ranch that my family owns has been in the family since 1901. And so I was the fourth generation. And there
Wow.
is definitely this sense that there is an intellectual property, a knowing of the landscape, a knowing of the seasons, and the kind of interdependence between the ranch I grew up on and nature that you could not acquire in one lifetime.
Mm.
And so there is this
Oh, wow.
idea that you are inheriting a knowledge that took many generations to acquire, and that it is a very important gift that you're not really worthy of.
Mm.
And so I, you know, in a spiritual sense, I think growing up on a ranch, it was just easy to remember how small you were, while at the same time feeling like you were important and your life had meaning and
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah, that, you know, since moving here, I grew up, you know, I grew up in suburbs and cities, and sort of gradually moved to more more treed rural places. And now, although I live in town, it's Powell and it's a ranch farm community. So, you know, one of my friends, I mean, I don't know, maybe you know him, maybe you don't. He's an organic farmer. He's a farmer, Rod Morrison, who's a wonderful guy. And it is absolutely true that there is a knowledge that, you know, I look up at the sky and it's beautiful. He looks up at the sky and it's beautiful and it means something. And you just know that it's true. And so I it's interesting. Years ago, I met you know, I was at a bar or whatever. I met a woman and she was embarrassed that, you know, her parents were farmers. I was like, what are you talking about? Like they grow food. Like we need it. No one survives without that. So anyway, I wasn't even that wasn't even on my mind. But thank you for that. You started to speak about there is it's a weird culture. Weird. It's not a word to use these days, I suppose. It's taken on a whole different meaning. But there is an unusual culture, and it's probably true everywhere, but it feels more pronounced here. Here meaning, this climate, cowboy country, and um, there is a sense of, as you spoke about it, there's a sense of, we are independent. We are, I do it on my own, and no, nobody does anything on their own. I mean, they get in a tractor that if that was not a factory, you're not on that tractor. And, and so, but I also know that, and because we've spoken about this, but I also know that, that seeps, it's cherry picked, right? We're independent. So there are certain things you don't ask for help for, even though we get this invisible help all the time, and it takes its toll. And you know that in an unfortunate and a personal way, that there is everybody, not maybe not young people. I suspect you also have clients that have been have been suffering in distress because they're supposed to. They're not supposed to have those kinds of issues. And if they do have that problem, they're supposed to get over it, suck it up, cowboy up.
Right. And I guess I would say that, the cowboy culture, the romantic culture of cowboying, just takes a very American notion to the extreme.
Yeah.
So, the idea of survival of the fittest, and um, that's not a cowboy, that's an American notion. And I feel like uh, cowboys are sort of the icon for that American ideal that we hold high. And so maybe sometimes uh, those of us who are a part of that culture feel like we especially have to take that notion to the extreme. But I definitely feel like I don't have any clients. Um, I'm thinking right now, I think all my clients are American. And so I don't really think I have any clients right now who don't struggle with their shame about needing help, and often their mental health crisis, or what, the struggle that led them to come to see me, comes from their struggle to give themselves permission to have a bad day or a bad week or a bad, 6 months, which is why we often end up in therapy after a big loss or a trauma, because suddenly we're not doing so well if we don't give ourselves permission to be sad.
It's a paradox, because on the one hand, being able to be resilient and being able to be independent and do things when nobody else is around and you're capable, and all of that is good. But making that the ethos, has all of like that's the way you ought to be, and across the board. First of all, nobody ever is, right? I mean, we're supported. I was listening to somebody talk about a theory of physics that makes it clear, nothing exists independently, right? Everything relies on so many other things, and so there's a way in which it's never true, and yet there is something about it that is true, right? That some people rise to the occasion in ways that are good and important, and then there's the the dark side of that people don't know when to ask for help, when it's okay to ask for help, and help of the sort that that you now provide. And I know it's relatively recent, right? You're a therapist. Well, you're now a therapist as of this past summer. Well,
Right.
and what is the title, by the way? Are you a psychologist? Or are you a counselor?
Therapist.
A therapist?
So I have a master of counseling. I know some people have, like, I have a niece who's a psychologist, and that's a PhD.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the master of counseling is newer. And also, since I didn't go back to school until I was in my late 50s, I definitely was feeling like I don't have time to get a PhD because
Yeah.
I want to get to work. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so I was looking for a more
Sure. Sure.
quicker path.
Yeah. You were drawn to become a counselor, but not because of, and we should say, we'll be speaking about the Luke Bell Memorial Foundation. I think that's the correct name, the full name, and sadly, that's a memorial because your son Luke Bell died, and and partially, or well, who knows how, but whether those things are partial or otherwise. In something you wrote, you said he died from mental illness. And I mean, you don't have to go into detail, but you certainly can. But but that wasn't what drew you to become a counselor.
Right. So I think I told you in our previous conversation that I have a master's degree in American Lit.
Yes.
I studied under Wendell Berry, and I kind of focused on agrarian topics in literature.
Hmm.
And I think,
I just have to say, I mean, and maybe nobody who's listening to this will know that name, but those of us who do know that name, for like, I studied with Wendell Berry, is like, what?
yeah, it's
Yeah.
just as great as it sounds.
Yeah.
It was just as great as it sounds. And it's not that big of a leap from in my mind, my love of reading has to do with my interest in what makes people tick. And I do think that oftentimes when we read, we are looking for people that make us feel less lonely. We are looking for characters that are experiencing something that we recognize. And the literature that we are drawn to often has something to do with a human experience that resonates with us. So I majored in English because I took a class that Wendell Berry was teaching, and I got really excited about agrarian topics in literature, and I decided, well, I might as well get my master's degree and just keep taking these classes until I run out
Until they throw you out.
to take. And then, and also because I just, in the 80s when I was going to college, and I was in Kentucky at that time, but I grew up in Shell, Wyoming. I never heard of therapists. So I mean, I'm sure there were some on a sitcom I watched, but also we only had one channel of television, and it wasn't a very good one. So I just don't, I feel like my ideas about what I could be when I grew up were kind of narrow. I thought I could be a rancher's wife, a teacher, and like a secretary. And, I knew a woman who was a lawyer, but I don't really like conflict. So that wasn't something that ever was attractive to me. And I knew women who were nurses, but I didn't really like science. So I think that in my I went to a therapist in my early 40s, and I think the minute I went to a therapist, I thought it would be interesting to be a therapist. Um,
Did you go here somewhere in Wyoming, or
I
did you?
did. I went to a woman who is now retired, and it was a great experience for me. I went when my stepdaughter was getting married, and she was marrying in Shell, my hometown, and probably feeling a little worried about what it was going to feel like for her mom to be in my hometown for her wedding. And so we were having a hard time planning the wedding together. And I really wanted to be a good stepmom, and I was kind of angry at her and frustrated. So I went to therapy to get some help with
Oh,
that. And it was a really great experience for me. And I was a person who had never been very interested in herself and didn't really know myself very well. And so I learned a lot.
mm,
And I I guess I felt like that's super interesting to get to know yourself in that way, and then to take what you know about yourself out into the world and look around and how differently things look.
mm,
I just, it was really empowering for me and exciting. And I think there was just a little seed that was planted in my mind at that time. But
yeah.
I also had two small children, two medium-sized children, and and I owned a gift and bookshop, and I was married, and there's no counseling school anywhere near here. And you know, that wasn't in the 90s. It's probably the late 90s, early 2000. Wasn't a time when tele when people, I feel like things feel so much easier online since COVID happened. But at that time, we felt like getting an education online, it was inferior. It was an inferior
Yes.
education.
Right. Right. Right.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
but it was something in the back of my mind that I always thought I might do someday when
Yeah.
my kids were grown and gone. That was such a long answer that I forgot what the question was.
Me too, but that's
I
okay.
answered it or not.
I like that part. You're a very thoughtful human being. I like that. Um, uh, well, let's shift. It's not sure it's a shift, but s- because I think it's important to talk about. There's so many overlaps. You're. I don't know if the gift store has an overlap with all of those things, but there are so many things that weave together. You can't use that word either. You can't say weird and you can't say weave. And my God, what a world! What a world we've created, right? Um, we haven't, but we have. Uh, um, so your son, Luke, Luke Bell. Some people may know that, may know his name, and in his story, he died. And what does that mean? He died from mental illness.
Um, I'll tell you what it means to me.
Good.
Because my son actually died of a fentanyl overdose.
Ah,
And when he died, it might have been CBS, some national news program called because they were doing a program on fentanyl, and they wanted me to come because Luke, as it turns out, Luke was well known. We
yeah.
didn't really realize that at the time, how well known he was, but they asked me to come on and talk about Luke and the tragedy of losing Luke to fentanyl. And I said, no, because I don't, if you don't mind if I talk about mental illness and what a lonely journey it is to be mentally ill in our country, I'll come on. But I don't really feel, yes, Luke died of a fentanyl overdose, but in my mind, he died because he was mentally ill and because the help that he needed is not available in our country for
Did,
people
did
with severe mental illness.
did he know he was taking fentanyl, or do you think he was taking something else, sort of self-medicating? And this may be an uncomfortable question, in which case, Just
I guess,
tell me to smack myself.
how would I know?
Well,
My belief is that he knew what he was taking. My belief is that he when I saw him, he'd been in Cody the week before he died, and I did say to his sister, his big sister, my stepdaughter, who was here at the time, when he left, it felt like he was saying goodbye.
oh,
Because he was very, he told me how much he loved me, and it was a very emotional, heartfelt goodbye. And during his mental illness, Luke was mostly very aloof. And so it was really unusual for him to
yeah,
talk to me openly about how grateful he was for my support and how much he loved me. So it felt like
yeah,
when they called to tell me they'd found him, I was not surprised, and I felt certain at the time that he had committed suicide. And of course, I will never know if he knew what he was doing, but I do know that he was in a place in his life where he knew that his drug and alcohol behaviors were really dangerous to him. He almost always, after drinking or using drugs, he almost always had a psychotic episode. And those psychotic episodes were really dangerous. He made really bad decisions when he was psychotic. And so I feel like whether or not he was intending to kill himself, he was aware that that was a possibility and he did not care.
yeah, yeah, I get that.
And also, I don't know why. I think for me, I don't, for me, it's easier for me to think that Luke, having tried everything, I mean, he tried electric shock treatment, he tried a lot of different kinds of medications. It somehow, for me, to think that it was a choice he made
Yeah,
feels less sad for him. Like he had thought about what he wanted for himself, and he didn't feel like he wanted to live the kind of life he would have to live. And so, yeah, I don't know, but to think that it was an accident and that he was still full of hope, that would make me feel sadder.
sure.
And so
Yeah, right. Obviously, be more tragic, right? Right. Well, I don't know if it'd be more tragic, but it's because it seems whenever a
right.
parent has to bury a child, it's always tragic. So,
And so one of the things, and stop me if you don't want me to answer this question that I think you asked me a while back and I haven't even gotten to yet, that you're making me think of is I was working at Northwest College when I became aware that he was spiraling into mental illness. And I worked with some really nice people and I love the college. And I was doing work that I don't think I'm particularly cut out to do. I was raising money for the college and then managing the Cody, the satellite school in Cody for Northwest College. And I think I was doing an above average job, but I'm definitely a relationship person, and some office duties are difficult for me. And when Luke started to spiral, and I had lost my husband a few years earlier, and my life was just I was feeling pretty hopeless and sad, and just sort of looking ahead and feeling like, how am I going to keep my head above water? And I think my decision to go to school came out of this place of feeling like, okay, I live alone. I have a lonely life. I'm really scared for my son. It's getting kind of hard to get up in the morning. And I feel like making this dream that I've had for about 20 years of becoming a therapist, making this dream come true would make me feel like my life has meaning and purpose and I'm doing something that I'm excited about. And I think that I just decided I needed to take that risk so that and kind of looking into my future and thinking, if my son isn't going to be a part of my life, at that time he wasn't speaking to me and had been missing for about 3 months, and my husband is dead. Yeah, this life just feels so much smaller and so diminished compared to the life that I imagined I would have right now.
Yeah.
I this is something I think I would be really exciting to me,
Yeah.
and so I just decided to go for it.
Did you seek, they're two different decisions, obviously, because one is about building a life that, and in some ways, it's a very practical decision, right? Like my life feels smaller and emptier. And so putting myself into this situation where I'm thinking about things and I'm drawn to those things anyway, and there are other people and, to collaborate with and all. So that's a very instrumental, practical, good. And there was also that, like, did you seek out therapy at that time? Like, were you,
Yeah, I started going to therapy maybe 3 or 4 months after my husband died.
and was that as successful as it was?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. It was a very different experience because um, I think, when I went to therapy, when my stepdaughter was getting married, I felt like, oh, I have a clear problem that I need help solving.
Correct. Right. Yeah.
And when I
Right.
went to therapy after my husband died, I was feeling like I have all of these emotions. I don't know what to do with them. And I think my friends are getting a little bit tired of it. I think, like it's just too much. I need to dump this somewhere every week because I'm offloading it on people who say hello to me in the grocery store. Or
Right.
uh, yeah,
Right.
I just felt a little bit like it was more in the beginning anyway. I feel like I just needed a place to dump.
It's
Um,
interesting because it's. I mean, you might feel like I'm burdening people I don't want to burden. On the other hand, there is that also that go back to that original piece of the conversation. There is, I'm not supposed to. I'm supposed to
right.
take care of the shit myself. And
But I
so,
do think that our culture, uh, you know, we are so unrealistic about grief. So, and so was I, and before I experienced,
yeah,
loss of someone. I lost my grandparents, but they died of old age. I mean,
very different.
I
Yeah,
I I feel like, after 3 months, most of my friends were like, I mean, you get 2 weeks off from work, right? Most of my friends were like, okay, come on, get a grip, Carol. It's
yeah,
been 3 months,
yeah. Come on, get over it.
right?
Life
Um,
goes on.
and not that they would, my friends are
No, of
great.
course.
Not that they
Right.
would say that.
No.
But I do think people start to get tired, and also, and I think this was true of my family members too, they kind of want the old Carol back. She was way more fun than this Carol and way less serious
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not as sad. And so I
Yeah.
wanted the old Carol back too. And I
Yeah.
went to
Exactly.
therapy because I thought I would get her back.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what you ended up with was the new and improved Carol.
Right. I don't know,
Yeah.
improved, but definitely new.
Yeah. You're modest. You're being modest. Well, but then you did this thing. And let's shift to that. Let's so we can spend a little time on the foundation, because I think it's a really important thing to get out there, right? So Luke he may not have been a superstar, having won every award, but he was on his way. And for those who pay attention in the country Western world, he was in that world, and folks knew him. Um, and so I'm assuming royalties started to come in, um, and you decided to start the Luke Bell Memorial Foundation specifically, and it's dedicated to, and let you speak about it, but to open the doors of therapy, of the possibility of mental health help to people who might not otherwise be able to afford themselves of that, right?
Right. So it's actually called the Luke Bell Memorial Affordable Counseling Program.
Ah,
And so it's no wonder you don't remember that because it's long. But we
affordable.
wanted it to say what it is. And I interned in Denver at school in a program very similar to this. And so it's modeled after a program that I participated in as an intern therapist during
I see.
graduate school. And
Yeah.
the idea, you're right, Luke does get royalties, and because they hadn't been able to find him regularly the last year or so of his life, uh, the first year there were a lot of royalties. So, and somehow it just didn't feel good to spend the money on fun.
Yeah.
And so my daughters and I decided that so this is how it works. One of the things that gets in the way, there are a few things that get in the way of therapy, and obviously one of them is cost. But another is just like, you have to have the wherewithal to call a therapist and to fill out the paperwork and answer the questions. And then if that therapist you call is busy, if you spend all this time researching and you decide, I want to see Dr. Shelley Graham, and then you call her and she says, I'm sorry, I don't have any openings. And so not only do we provide when you apply, all you have to do is say, this is my name, this is where I live, my income is $65,000 a year or less, and I can afford to pay, and you choose some number between $25 and $65 per session. And then, and you can say, I've already, so-and-so has already agreed to see me, or I'm working with Carol Bell. Or you can say, I really struggle with anxiety and I live in Powell and I need somebody who works with people with anxiety in Powell. I'd like to see my therapist in person. And if possible, I'd like to see a man. So then we have a committee of 2 right now who reviews the applications. It's kind of a no-brainer. Almost everyone who applies receives support. The only 2 people who we've turned away, one of them had insurance. So we don't, unless you haven't met your deductible, we don't award money to people who have already met their deductible. And the other person had already received a scholarship for 10 sessions. And so at the time, we were only allowing people to apply once per year. But since then, we have voted to allow people to apply twice. So anyway, you fill out the application. The committee approves the application. They reach out and let you know that they've approved the application, and you will hear from a therapist within the next couple of days. And then they either contact the therapist that you've requested, or they find you a therapist.
Oh, well.
And then and so all you do is fill out the application, and then all the work that can be kind of overwhelming if you're in crisis
Yeah.
is taken care of for you. And when you hear from somebody next, it is your therapist calling to set up an appointment.
And are you sort of, whoever is doing it, are people sort of, beating the door down, right? I mean,
It's
or
been
is
a
it
really lovely pace, because in the beginning, I told the woman that I work for in my agency, and I have friends who are therapists, so I just sort of told therapists about it, and friends who work in the healthcare business. And in the beginning, most people came to us because their therapist told them about it. And they had either, it's the new year and they hadn't met their deductible, or they would never meet their deductible because it was $5,000,
right?
or something. They got divorced and they hadn't found a job yet. So most people early on came to us from their therapist, and so it was kind of a slow build. I think
Yeah.
that we launched the program in February, and we probably
February of this year of
Mhm,
2024. Oh, so this is really
it's
relatively new.
new. Um, and Luke died in 2022, so we had the idea um,
Right.
right away, and so we put the money in an account, but it took. And we got a domestic nonprofit. It took a while, and we were trying to figure out how to advertise and how to
Yeah.
create a website. And then at Christmas, we got a $50,000 donation, and we decided, okay, let's,
Well,
we
a
already
donation
had,
independent of the. This is not the royalties.
yeah.
This is somebody or some foundation or whatever. Oh, that's wonderful.
And so we used that made us feel like, okay, somebody has this kind of confidence in us.
Hmm.
Let's pay somebody to set up a web page, to design a logo.
Sure.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we did. We launched. We
Good
got
for
a
you.
domestic nonprofit. We got everything going, um, and we probably had about 15 clients by June or July that we were serving, and then now we're at like 35
Oh
clients,
well.
and we're getting. I think we got 3 or 4 new applicants this week, so we are excited about that because we're not spending as much money as we hope to be spending. Luke's royalties right now, and I'm sure as time goes by they'll rise and fall. We still have an album to release, so that'll
Ah,
really kick things up a little bit, but they're about $20,000 a year, 25, and we would like to for sure be spending $20,000 a year, and we haven't spent that much. We probably will. Two things are surprising. One is that people aren't breaking down the door. It's been a really nice pace, and the other thing is that people really do try to pay what they can afford to pay. And so we just kind of assumed that everyone would want to pay $25 per session, but a lot of people are paying
yeah.
55 or $65,
Yeah.
and then we pay up to $125. We will pay up to $100 per session, and the therapist can only receive a total of $125.
I see. I see. I see. Uh-huh. And well, that's interesting. So you just made mention of it. So uh, I'm. This is you're not seeing this as a kind of sunset organization, right? When the royalties, right? People who stop making music, eventually it peters out, and but you're at least either actively trying to raise money, or contemplating actively trying to raise money.
So far we haven't actively tried to raise money because every time somebody, or often when people hear about, I got a check for $1,000 today, which that easily supports 10 sessions
Yeah,
and could support as many as 20, depending on
right,
what the client agreed to pay.
right.
So we
Yeah,
haven't had to actively try to raise money yet because people hear about the program and they support it. And I also, in my mind, imagine that some people will participate in the program. This is my hope, that some people will participate in the program in their 20s and 30s and then go on to have successful lives and feel like they want to support someone like they were when they were in their 20s and 30s
Yeah.
and give back. So my hope is that over time, the program does such great work that it creates its own support system.
You're very optimistic, and you might be, and you know, you might be right. And yeah, it's
And also, I'm not afraid to fundraise. I mean,
yeah, clearly,
we need
right.
to.
Sure. And it's well, here's that, you know, it's circled back to the initial conversation. It's like, you know, there's the puzzle, right? You're not afraid to fundraise. And it's, I was about to say, and it's a cause, it's a use of funds that in all sorts of ways is very modest and very important and serves the people who need to be served most. And we live in a culture where, although maybe that's shifting, we live in this little corner of the world where going to therapy is something, well, maybe it's everywhere, right? I mean, when I lived in Los Angeles, people wore the fact that they went to therapy as a badge of honor, right?
And I think that there are more people do that, younger people do that than they did. And I guess I'll just say, you know, one of the things, especially when we started out, you just become aware of the needs that you're not, you know, the needs that are not being filled by the program. Our program is designed, and we have a board of 3, and then we have these 2 committee members, and I have a very involved, interested family, big extended family on my side of the family and David's side of the family. And so we talked about it a lot to sort of think about who it is we want to serve. And one thing we were clear about is we want to serve people who are not being served and people who are motivated. So that is why therapists are not allowed to write off the client's portion. You know, like they cannot say to their client, "Oh, you don't have to pay your copay. We'll just eat that."
Right.
Because we are serving clients who we want them to have some skin in the game. Our belief is that, you know, $25 is like 4 cups of coffee. And even Luke, when he was homeless, could come up with the money to buy coffee.
Yeah.
So we feel like you should be prioritizing therapy enough to
give up your cup of coffee
a little bit.
Right.
And so we want motivated clients who are, I guess, motivated and who can afford to pay a little bit. And so there are people that, you know, maybe they get behind on their payments and they're wanting us to help with counseling debt, and we don't do that.
Right.
There are people who can't afford to pay. We don't take those clients.
Yeah.
We don't take people under the age of 18 because our hope is that they're on Medicare or Medicaid.
I you know, I see that as wise. I don't know if we spoke about this. I started a school and ran it for about 20 years. And it was a private school, but it was quite specifically an effort to open the doors of private school. I mean, you know, I'm a public school kid. I didn't even know what they were for, private schools. And so this was a real effort to do that. So, and the structure of it was everybody pays something. And some people pay everything, right? Some people pay that much, and other people pay that much, but you don't get to like, you know, if you get behind, somebody's calling you up. It's like, we need your $10 this month. And because skin in the game matters, right? I mean, like, you are making an effort. It's a stretch of some sort. And I think that's That's a good idea.
Yeah,
And it's hard, right? I mean, there's the whole privacy issues. I was going to say, you get feedback that things are going well, but you can't really get feedback because you can't really talk to the therapist or
right.
whatever.
I think, we're planning to get together with all the therapists who are participating in December and ask for feedback from
Oh,
them.
yes, I heard about that because of my
And
wife.
then,
Yeah, yeah,
right. And then and we'll see if people feel, I mean, you can give feedback about the program. And
right,
some people have emailed feedback. And then I think that the committee can send an email to the clients asking them if they would like to share
right.
feedback. And of course, they can say no.
I was going to
But
say
if
anonymous,
they,
and plus it could be anonymous. I mean, they could still
right,
say lovely things that
right. And
anonymous.
we would like to be able to tell some of our larger donors,
Yeah,
we would like to be able to share
sure.
anonymously some feedback,
You bet.
just so they know that
Yeah,
how,
your dollars went to
yeah,
a really good thing.
yeah,
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that's wonderful. I mean, I really do. I think it's wonderful, and it's a need. It's so clearly a need. I mean, what's interesting in the 4 years that I've been here, so I'm a real newcomer. Um, there's more and more conversation, quite specifically. I mean, in whether the bills pass or not, even the legislature of Wyoming is talking about, improving mental health and mental health support for people who need that. And so it's, one hopes that it's a wave that will keep coming, that not because everybody should be in therapy, although I don't know, maybe you think everybody could get something from it, but which they probably could, but to have that available to people when they do, when they
yeah,
when they can use that support, when they need, because like if we lived in communities that were really communities, maybe nobody would need it, but but you said it before, it's like, sometimes you just you need some help sorting through the mess of life
right,
that is sometimes messy, and
right,
everybody knows it. So whether they want to be tough about it or not, everybody knows it.
right.
So
And, sometimes we're lucky and we have just the right friend or family
that's right.
member
That's right.
in our lives when we're having a certain kind of crisis. But um, sometimes, I think in particular about becoming a widow at age 51. I had a lot of friends. I have a lot of friends who are widows, but I didn't have any friends my age who had lost a husband. Um,
Hmm. Yeah.
and no one in my family knew quite what to do about it,
Right.
or you know how many layers there are to that kind of a loss. And so,
Plus, sometimes family is,
right,
you know, there's so many different entanglements, and
right, yeah.
like you
And
need
the same
somebody
with
who
friends.
you
Our
need
friends and
somebody who's like,
family, they have an agenda when they listen to us. They want us to get better. And
yeah,
therapists don't necessarily see grief as a neurosis.
right,
They don't necessarily
right,
see a year of sadness as
no,
a sign that there is something wrong with you.
right,
Whereas
yeah,
our friends and family members feel like, honey, you got to get over this. This has been
right,
going on way too long.
yeah. I mean, therapists want to open the windows, pull the curtains back, bring in the light, bring in fresh air, and help you sort of, you know, help you freshen up the rooms,
Right.
right, and make it livable again. So, well, I'm looking at the time, and I promised you time, and I promised you not to too much to do too much time. I have so enjoyed this conversation,
I have
and
too, David. Thanks.
and so thank you. And if there's anything I can do to help, let me know. And And who knows, maybe we'll speak again. I hope to meet you sometime. You're just down the road
I know.
after all. So what a pleasure.
Pleasure for me too, David. Thanks.
So thank you. Thank you so much.
You're listening to Curiosity Invited with David Bryan here on LA Talk Radio.